Lisa is with the Prader-Willi California Foundation. And she's working with us on a specific case, but we also serve others that have Prader-Willi. And so we have a number of people who are very interested in learning from you. And Lisa, in our last meeting, I was so inspired by your passion for the topic and your expertise that we're just so grateful to have you. And I'll leave it at that.
Excellent. Well, thank you very, very much. Yes, I'm very, very passionate about this because each of you is an integral part of the quality of life of everybody you serve, but particularly those with Prader-Willi syndrome, which you'll see as we go through this training. So what I'd like to ask you guys to do is we are going to be covering an overview of some of the very important topics and really focusing, and we'll hit the pieces about logistically, how do you create a secure food environment, right? And then we can even at a later time talk about how you work with licensing or whatever state agency, HCBS, to make sure you're providing a safe environment for your individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome and still doing it legally, right? So you don't get dinged for that. But the predominant feature that's most troublesome to providers is the behaviors that are part and parcel of Prader-Willi syndrome. So that's what we're going to really be focused on and intertwining in our training today. And these behavior strategies aren't just for people with Prader-Willi syndrome. They're going to be applicable to your other residents that you serve who have other disabilities. But if you don't use them in individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome, you will have lots of behavior problems. And when you do utilize them, you'll have far fewer behavior problems. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and get our presentation started. All right, can you all see this?
Yes.
Good. Okay, I'm going to get rid of that. All right, we're at 21 people now. So, and again, I'll keep an eye on. All right, so this is for you guys, Lifehouse supported staff. So it's important to know that what we see is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's going on underneath the individual with Prader-Willi syndrome. And the more we're aware of what might be going on underneath the individual, how they think, then we will have greater success creating strategies and understanding how to create those strategies that reduce unwanted behaviors. And what we do know is that anxiety is one of the most significant drivers of unwanted maladaptive behaviors. Others include worry, fear, frustration, irritation, disappointment is another big one, and anger. So Prader-Willi syndrome anxiety influences maladaptive behavior. So anxiety is that excessive worry, fear, unrealistic view of problems, and feeling out of control. Almost everybody with Prader-Willi syndrome has a high level of anxiety that lurks just below the surface, and it's ready to respond or react to any real stressor and any perceived stressor. You may not perceive something as a stressor, but if the individual with Prader-Willi syndrome does, they're likely to have a behavior attached to it. Anxiety is actually the cause of many of Prader-Willi syndrome's maladaptive behaviors, including arguing and defiance, verbal and physical aggression, repeated questions, excessive talking, elopement, and skin picking. Though there are other reasons why people will do some of these behaviors, but anxiety is often a big part of some of them, many of them. So what this means is anything or anyone that raises anxiety has the potential to cause a behavior problem. And you are a part of the individual's environment, which means that you have the potential to cause a behavior problem and you have the potential to cause a behavior problem, right? When we reduce or eliminate the cause of anxiety, including the anxiety you may be creating in your conversations or interactions with the individual, then we reduce or eliminate the potential for maladaptive and unwanted behaviors. And really what we're focusing on is reducing the potential for unwanted behaviors, getting around them before they even begin. Sidestepping anxiety before it even comes into play. So we're going to look at some of the top 10 behavior management strategies as we incorporate these into residential care. So one of the things, the first thing we'll be looking at is creating that Prader-Willi syndrome specific environment, the basics of how you do that. Empathy is an intervention, painting the picture, fix a past goof, preferred choices, disguise your nose, allow for the possibility of rightness, use egocentrism, which is part and parcel of the syndrome, to your advantage, motivate individuals externally, and use transition prompts to increase their flexibility. So the number one strategy, the basics of where we start is creating a PWS environment that's safe space, which includes food security, routines, rules, boundaries, and calm responses from you. So the most important thing, we're going to start with it, is food security. But before we do, we're going to do a very quick review of hyperphagia, because that's why we create food security. Because the predominantly known or kind of hallmark symptom that when we think about Prader-Willi syndrome is hyperphagia, which is that dysfunctional appetite regulating system. It is physiological, it's neurological, it's in the brain chemistry, and it drives the individual either to find as much food, eat as much food, squirrel away as much food as possible. It lasts throughout the lifetime. It does not go away, though it changes sometimes throughout the lifetime. And it certainly changes depending upon how supportive the environment is. Hyperphagia at the neurological level, it makes the body, so the brain functions as if the body is starving. It's like in primitive times when there was a very scarce access to food, so that individuals, and our ancestors, prehistoric peoples, constantly were looking for food. It drove that primitive brain drove the individual to find as much food, squirrel it away as possible. That's how the brain is working with somebody with Prader-Willi syndrome. There's new research that shows that Prader-Willi syndrome may actually be a starvation-based medical disorder, that the brain believes the body is starving, so it drives the individual to compensate for that to get more food. So again, there are no breaks on getting food, finding food, eating food. There are no breaks on that. There's no stopping that. The body stores food that it eats as fat, very different than you and I store food. The brain of somebody with the syndrome stores all that food as fat in various places differently in the body. And it lowers the metabolic rate to almost half what it should be in order to conserve energy. So what that means is if you and I eat an apple, pretty healthy apple, our body, I'm making up these numbers, I have no idea. Our body would metabolize or process that apple, say in 1 hour. The person with Prader-Willi syndrome won't have that apple processed through their body for probably 2 hours, almost 2 hours, because metabolism is almost half. So when they're eating and eating and eating and eating in slow metabolism, that food is kind of staying in the body and not getting burned or stored properly in the body. Hyperphagia underlies many unwanted behaviors because it fuels anxiety, telling the person, go get food, go get food. So unmanaged hyperphagia plus a slow metabolic rate cause rapid weight gain, the potential for very rapid death from stomach rupture, because if more food is going in before it comes out, then you're going to have too full of a stomach. it's either going to rupture or it's going to die as it stretches and kills the tissue around it, become necrotic. The same thing happens in the bowel. If the body doesn't expel through pooping, then the bowel can have way too much stool in it, and you either rupture or become necrotic and then rupture. And that both of those two things will cause death very, very quickly. Choking is one of the main causes of death in people with Prader-Willi syndrome because there is a dysfunctional swallowing system, because there is low saliva, and because people are trying to eat food as fast as possible. One, because the brain tells them to eat as fast as possible, and two, so they don't get caught maybe with unauthorized food that they know they shouldn't be eating. And then the potential for morbid obesity and complications of morbid obesity is always there. The other thing that can lead to death in the individual with the syndrome that can be related to hyperphagia, but it isn't always, is lack of impulse control. So where there's no brakes on the intake of food, there's no brakes on the managing of impulses that come from feelings. For instance, we've had people with Prader-Willi syndrome become very upset about something while driving in the back seat of somebody's car or the front seat of somebody's car, and jump out of the car. And some people have died by doing that on a freeway. No brakes on that impulse control. There is no medication that treats hyperphagia, food drive. There's no appetite medication that you and I might take that would reduce our appetite that is effective on anybody with Prader-Willi syndrome. There's a lot of research going on right now, but there is nothing available to reduce that appetite. There is no genuine learning how or teaching the individual to learn how to manage their food intake over time. People with the syndrome know a lot about what healthy foods they should eat, what healthy quantities they should have. There are people with Prader-Willi syndrome can teach classes probably on nutrition, but that has nothing to do with whether they're able to manage or control whether they eventually eat or not. And some people can manage not taking food on a kitchen counter or going into places and not taking food or trying to sneak food much better than other people. That doesn't mean if left unsupervised that they wouldn't take food. So the current management of that hyperphagia food drive is 24/7 every single day of the year of their lifetime, supervising them so that there is no access to food. That also reduces anxiety, which we'll see in a moment. And anything that reduces anxiety reduces maladaptive behavior potential. And that's really our goal, right? It is critical that we know that Prader-Willi syndrome is not an eating disorder. An eating disorder is a psychiatric disorder that is amenable to psychotherapy and medication and medical interventions. Prader-Willi syndrome is not an eating disorder. It does not respond to any of those interventions. It is a medical disorder, and right now there is no treatment for that particular symptom and many of the other symptoms. So the environmental basic that we're going to be looking at right now is called food security. It's a term coined by Linda Gorosh and Janice Forster. It tells us that it gives us a roadmap for how do we manage the environment in regard to food with people with Prader-Willi syndrome. We give them no doubt when the next meal or snack will be served. No, there is absolutely no doubt to the individual when they're going to eat, approximately the flow of the day of when they're going to eat. There's must be consistent routines about food consumption. No doubt that I'm going to get breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, supper, or some derivation thereof. There is no hope or chance that I'm going to get extra food. So there's no chance that if you walk in with a McDonald's a Happy Meal, that I'm going to get that if I wasn't supposed to get that. If you walk in with a McDonald's Happy Meal and I don't know anything about it, I'm going to hope I'm going to get that McDonald's Happy Meal. When we reduce or eliminate any of that hope to get extra food that's not authorized, then we reduce anxiety and any behavior problems attached to it. And no anxiety or no disappointment means there's no behavior problem. So our mantra is no doubt plus no hope equals no disappointment. And that's our goal, is to have no disappointment, because when somebody with Prader-Willi syndrome isn't disappointed, man, everything is great. Life is great. There are no behavior problems. So quickly, no doubt means, again, that we're going to be serving the meals for, I'm going to use not anybody is an individual name through this, so that you can use this training somewhere else at any time. Or, you know, so for the people that with Prader-Willi syndrome who you are serving, you want to establish consistent routines for when they're going to be eating. It doesn't mean that we serve breakfast at 7 a.m. on the dot, and then we have lunch at 10 a.m. on the dot. And we have, because if you're serving things or saying things are happening on the dot, you know, life happens and maybe we have to eat at 7:30 or 12:30, right? But what we're talking about is setting up a flow of the day. So you can assign times to it, but it's more of the flow of the day that we're more interested in. So most people with the syndrome can manage about 3 hours interval between eating before we have to eat, before we really butt up against the hyperphagia drive. So we're looking at breakfast, 3 hours later, a morning snack, 3 hours later, lunch, 3 hours later, an afternoon snack, 3 hours later, dinner, something like that. It's scheduled food needs to be as reliable as breathing air, because food to the individual with Prader-Willi syndrome is their life. And if there is any perceived interruption in their food, that's like me telling you I'm going to cut off the oxygen in your room for, I'm not telling you how long, right? You know you're going to die if there is no oxygen. That same experience is often what it's like for somebody with Prader-Willi syndrome. If I don't know that I'm going to have food, I think I'm going to die. We never use food as a reward. Never. We never use food as a bribe. Never. And we never withhold food for poor behavior. Okay. Because what you're doing is you're interfering with their food security. You can, however, pause the food schedule until a requested task is completed. For instance, after you shower, we'll have our lunch. A lot of people with the syndrome don't really care so much about their hygiene. So we build in making sure they're taking care of their hygiene, taking a shower, brushing their teeth, you know. So after your shower in the morning, then we have breakfast. Well, I want breakfast now. I know, I'm really hungry too. So after your shower, we'll have breakfast. And you don't give in on that. So you're never telling the person you're not going to have breakfast until you take your shower. We're never saying that. What we're saying is you can have your breakfast as soon as you take your shower. Very slight verbal differences in how you're phrasing things that have significant impact on how the individual with the syndrome hears it and will accept it, right? No, you can't have your breakfast until after you take your shower is going to cause a behavior problem. Absolutely, you can have your breakfast. As soon as you take your shower, we'll have your breakfast. Is less likely to cause any behavior problem, other than the power struggle of, but I want my breakfast now. I know. As soon as you have your shower, we'll have breakfast. Absolutely. It's not safe for you to eat while you're yelling or crying. Honey, it's not safe for you to eat while you're yelling or crying. So as soon as your body is calm, we'll have lunch. Those are ways that you keep food security and you incorporate in how to manage behaviors that you really need to have happen for their own safety or for the flow of their own day. Any questions that you have, please note them down so we can talk about them at the end of this. No hope or chance refers to the fact that access to food creates hope, Hope creates anxiety, and anxiety creates the potential for an unwanted behavior. So if food is available, the individual can think of nothing else anxiously about how to get that food. So we manage that by eliminating access to food to reduce anxiety that they're feeling, and behavior problems. For instance, if they walk into a store and there's a candy dish on the counter, that's going to create hope. I can get some of that candy out of that dish. When we eliminate the fact that the seeing that candy dish on the counter, we've eliminated their thinking about how do I get that candy out of that candy dish, and then we've reduced the behavior problems associated with it. So what does that mean in the home setting? In the work setting, it means locking the refrigerator, pantry, medicine cabinet, and money. Money is access to food, credit cards, any of that. We eliminate that by locking those, restricting access in that way. And that's where we bump up, especially in a supported living setting. How do we do that? Staff always ask. We know that needs to be done. How do we do that? How do we let our agency know that we have to do this and still be in compliance with clients' rights? And we can help you with lots of strategies and lots of ways to legally do that. We've been working very closely in the beginning when HCBS's rules and regulations were hot to work with CMS to learn how they view what would be acceptable to them. And so if it's acceptable to them, it should be acceptable to any California agency. No one should eat in front of the individual with Prader-Willi syndrome if food is not also available to the person with Prader-Willi syndrome. So if you're walking in the door with again, that McDonald's Happy Meal, you best have one for the individual with the syndrome as well. Establish rules for the type and quantity of food before you attend any outings. That's very critical. What we want to do is encourage you to put a lock on the thought that unauthorized food is available, and never give into a tantrum for anything, but especially food. If unauthorized food is known or suspected, you're not going to question that consumption. Did you eat those chips? Because if you're questioning, did you eat those chips? You know, nobody wants to get in trouble. So you just set them up to either lie to you so they don't get in trouble, or have a huge amount of anxiety because they don't want to get in trouble, or have a behavior problem that defends themselves about getting into trouble. And if somebody ate chips, it means that they had access to that food, which is your responsibility as residential provider to restrict that access to unauthorized food, or if you're a vocational provider, to restrict that access to food with supervision. Rather than asking, did you eat those chips? You're going to presume that the food was eaten, and you're going to kind of state it as a fact. Oh, I see those chips are gone. And again, because it's your responsibility, you're going to kind of accept responsibility for that person taking the food. You're going to let them know that you'll make sure that that doesn't happen again, that they don't have access to that, because you really want to make sure they stay healthy and safe. And accessing unauthorized food is never healthy or safe. People with the syndrome, especially those who are thinner and have always been thinner, are at higher risk for a sudden death from a single food binge. And a single food binge can be as little as, I'm throwing this out there. A single food binge can be as little as, eating a bag of potato chips. That could cause death if all the right factors with somebody with the syndrome are in place. Slow emptying bowel, slow emptying stomach, and then we're putting a whole bunch more food in there. That could certainly cause an acute problem. So in the future, you're going to always secure all those food sources. If somebody's accessing food and you have no clue how to do it, how they did it, this is a way for you to find out where they may be getting that food. I've had people, I've been called in to consult, and I've had people with the syndrome when I've said to you, man, That's so amazing how you got that food, because nobody at your house can figure it out. Dude, that's really clever. How did you do that? And then they'll tell me on the slide, right? So you can use some of that information about, wow, that's just amazing that you even thought of that. Can you share any of that? How did you think, without telling me how you did it or where you got it, tell me, which can give you clues without the individual know that they're even sharing how they squirrel away food without anybody knowing. Without the individual knowing, you're going to need to work with your dietitian or whomever is in charge of meal planning to reduce the calories in future meals, either that day or throughout the week, in order to compensate for the additional consumed calories. Higher cognitive abilities and verbal skills do not mean that the individual can override their insatiable drive to obtain food. Lots of providers are kind of fooled because people with this syndrome will often look like they can manage. We hear people all the time saying, "Oh no, I couldn't eat another bite. I'm so full." You turn your back, or another time when they know they're not supervised, they'll be eating a great deal of food. So people actually on the other side of that spectrum who have very limited intellectual functioning can be brilliant about creating multi-step, very complex ways of obtaining food. But the ability to plan and execute complicated arrangements to get food doesn't necessarily mean they have that ability in other areas of life. It's almost like a savant skill. How do I get food? And they can think very, very cleverly about how to do that. Almost everybody who is very honest generally, who has Prader-Willi syndrome may lie, fib, or steal when it comes to food. This is just a symptom of Prader-Willi syndrome. Behavior problems are often related to unsecured food sources somewhere, because that's stirring up anxiety somewhere. And that once all the food sources are secured with locks, anxiety or supervision, anxiety is reduced and behavior improves generally in all areas. It's often about quantity with individuals with the syndrome. It's almost often about quantity. So at home, in the home setting, you might want to use smaller plates, spread out the food, chop it up into smaller pieces so that it looks like there's a lot more on a plate. And whatever you're serving, when you're eating with your resident, your plate should look like their plate. We run a summer camp every year that serves 60, 70 people with Prader-Willi syndrome at the same time for a week. And we plate all the food and we bring it to them. We had a camper who had a major problem because the salad was scooped out exactly the same as everybody else's, but everybody else's had a nice rounded look to theirs, right? And it spread out the plate. Hers was kind of pointy like this, and it didn't take up very much room on the plate. So her presumption was she got less food because of that concrete thinking. She couldn't see that it would, if you smushed it down, it's the same amount of food, honey. So I can't express enough how everything must be looking the same. We also had a major issue. So if you have more than one person that you're serving, or if you're serving yourself and you've got more raisins on your salad or your oatmeal or whatever, than the individual with Prader-Willi syndrome, that could be a problem. Everything must be the same so that there are no issues. Now, to stay on this just for another moment, if you have a special diet and you're not eating the same food as the individual with the syndrome, you're going to set that up at the very, very beginning. You know what, honey, my food is different than yours because I don't eat meat, or I'm a vegan, or whatever it is. And usually that's just fine. But if you're eating the same foods as they are and you got a lot more than they do, that's generally a big problem. So you're going to eat more food outside their presence when you're able to. And don't remove food or anything actually from the hands of somebody with Prader-Willi syndrome unless it's dangerous or lethal, because that's almost always going to have a behavior outburst, major behavior outburst. consistency and routines help people feel safe and secure. So our environmental basic B is routines, because when people know what the routine is, they don't have to worry. Routines reduce anxiety, and people with the syndrome, as we know, have high levels of anxiety, but routines reduce those by giving them predictability, consistency, and sameness in their environment. Create routines to reduce anxiety. Create routines around bedtime, wake up time, meals, snacks, household chores, and create visual or written charts or schedules, right? So for your food schedule, note though, put it on a piece of paper, and with the individual you're serving, ask them with you, well, okay, so what time should we have breakfast, do you think? About what time should we have snack? About what time should we have lunch? Do that throughout the day. What kinds of meals or snacks will you have? Writing them as options for them to choose from. In my home, let me finish that thought. Giving them options to choose from for breakfast can be really helpful. And if you are having them circle, do you want cereal or eggs for breakfast today? That's what their choice is. And they circle that on the schedule, and they know that's what they're going to be having for breakfast. So for instance, in my household, I have various options for breakfast, various options for snacks, various options for lunch, that my son will circle, and that says that's what he wants for the day, or that's what he wants for the next day. And that is works. We borrowed it from how other residential facilities that serve groups of individuals in a group home setting find very, very helpful. And in a supported living setting, you'll find that helpful too. You can refer to that written schedule, whatever it is, to avoid arguments. So if the individual says, no, I wanted pancakes today. Oh, you wanted pancakes today, huh? Okay, well, I was pretty sure that you circled eggs. Where's our schedule? Where is that schedule? And instead of you saying, no, you chose eggs. No, I didn't, I chose pancakes. No, you just refer to that written schedule. And when they see it in writing, it almost always goes like, oh, and then the issue is done. Provide advance notice about any changes in the plans as appropriate to the individual. Some individuals need a lot of warning, of what's going to be changed. Some individuals can't have a lot of warning of what's going to be changed because it creates too much anxiety. So you have to find the sweet spot for the individual that you're serving. Rules, environmental basic C, make it easier to obtain success. Knowing the rules reduces anxiety, and people with Prader-Willi syndrome are huge rule followers, right? They're our little policemen. So establish the rules to reduce anxiety. Establish the rules for chores. In the morning, you make your bed before you come down. I'm just making these up. You can do whatever rules you decide. But giving responsibility and creating responsibility for the person in their own home from the get-go is extremely helpful to their own sense of self, right? They're running their own household. So setting the table themselves, not necessarily making their own food, but setting the table. Or if they are going to make their own food, you set out the individual pieces of the food for them, and then put the rest of the food away, so that if they are sneaking food while they're making their own food, they're not ingesting any extra calories. Rules for hygiene. After you go to the bathroom, wash your hands. Rules for exercise or physical activity. Rarely do we call it exercise anymore because that's got such a bad connotation to people with the syndrome, but we call it physical activity. So first we walk and then we have our snack. So you schedule that in. First we go for our walk and then we come back, we have our snack or lunch or whatever. Social rules, greeting, we don't steal from other people. We shake hands, maybe not in COVID, we do whatever greeting we do now. And when we go shopping, we don't steal. That's another rule, establish it. And then of course, food rules. No eating with your hands, use your fork and utensils. Can't tell you how many people with a syndrome will eat with their hands and lick a plate if they're allowed to do that. When something is understood as a rule, it's more likely to be followed, especially if you're working with the individual to kind of create the rules. Hey, we're going to create the rules. So if they've got input into it, then they're going to be following it much better. So before your individual even moves into the home, or the first week or so as you're in the home, start creating some of these rules. They're not meant to be punitive, these rules, in any way, shape, or form. They're to give boundaries to the individual. Post them so they're really easily seen, like on the refrigerator or on a poster board, and be sure to establish the rule that you can change the rule if necessary for their health and safety. Boundaries are critically important to the individual with the syndrome. They provide structure to relationships. They establish what behavior is or is not acceptable. Firm boundaries reduce anxiety and help people feel safe. They're critically important. So create clear and firm boundaries to reduce anxiety, because that feels like buoys to them from the free-floating experience of anxiety throughout their body. The goal is to be the authority, not the authoritarian, because being the authoritarian creates behavior problems, because it activates the oppositional thinking in people with the syndrome, and it creates power struggles. So we're not authoritarian, we are authoritative. Providers must be experienced as the fair authority, so that the people that you're serving can feel safe and supported. So define and uphold your boundaries with gentle but firm authority and empathy. We'll look at empathy big time in a minute. Stick to your boundaries, stick to your routines and rules. I've given you some examples here. We can look at them later and in more specific detail after you're serving your resident if you want to have another training. Don't repeat your requests more than 3 times, because if you're continuing to repeat your requests, come on, it's time to go, put your shoes on. Come on, it's time to go, put your shoes on. Come on, it's time to go, put your shoes on. And if they're not moving, they're not going to hear you on the 4th time. All you're doing now is setting up the knowledge that they don't have to listen to you. So on the 3rd time, come on, guys, it's kiddo. Don't call him kiddo. We need to put your shoes on. It's time to go. So it looks like you need some help to put your shoes on. Then you're going to physically get up and start very gently, not menacingly, getting up and walking towards the individual. Very often that will spur somebody to actually move and put their shoes on. And if it doesn't, then you say, I'm going to help put your shoes on for you. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Don't promise anything that you don't intend to follow through on. Again, you've got to be the reliable authority. Don't lie and attempt to avoid a situation, especially if it's possible that your deceit could be discovered. For instance, if somebody, most people with the syndrome can hear like really, really well. So if you open a wrapper in another room and they say, "Are you eating something?" And you are, don't say, "No, I'm not eating anything." Because then you won't be believed for anything. So you may say, "You know what? Yep, I am eating something. Is that bothering you?" And then manage it from there. Don't threaten to remove a privilege. Removing things generally doesn't teach cooperation. It makes things a lot worse with people with the individual with the syndrome. But if you do remove a privilege, like, "You know what, honey, if you don't get your shoes on, you're going to lose the privilege to watch TV for the next hour." I don't know. Then give them the opportunity to earn that privilege right back. You can earn that privilege right back by putting your shoes on right away and let's go. Often that will work, but be very careful with removing privileges. Don't allow yourself to be manipulated. When an individual believes they've manipulated you, they no longer feel safe. And their anxiety increases, and then the potential for a behavior problem increases. So don't give in, don't be manipulated. If you think you've been manipulated, or you can go back and kind of fix that. We'll look at how to do that in a minute. Anxiety is significantly increased by raised, critical, accusatory, or angry sounding voices. So you as the provider must always respond calmly despite how you feel on the inside, especially during an emotionally charged interaction with your individual. So no matter how upset the individual is, you remain calm looking on the outside. And it's important that you calm yourself by breathing before you react, right? Whatever calming strategies you use, you're going to want to beef those up when you're serving your individual with the syndrome. Do listen to the individual who says, leave me alone, because they're really telling you, I'm losing control of my body. You need to back up. You need to actually physically do that, back up. Don't give them eye contact anymore because that feels too invasive. Keep them in your peripheral vision so that they stay safe. But do leave them alone so that they can reduce their anxiety and their feelings of anger. I've stood too close to somebody and not listened closely enough when they've said, leave me alone, and I've been clobbered in the stomach and elsewhere in the body. So don't do that. Don't do what I did. Calm responses, it's important to know that people with the syndrome really do often, not everybody, but very many people like drama. They like to stir the pot. They love drama. They like gossip. They like telling stuff about somebody and then walking away and watching what happens after that, but especially with staff and other residents. So don't get sucked into the drama and intervene with gossip as much as you need to, especially if they're talking with other people with the syndrome. Lots of gossip. That's not true. Respond to a tantrum or unwanted behavior with indifference, boredom. Ignore behaviors as best you can that are safe to ignore, because that's what's going to help extinguish those behaviors more quickly. Lying to avoid blame or gain an audience, making up stories, it's called confabulation. Very common symptoms with Prader-Willi syndrome. It is just part of the syndrome, just making up crap. And certainly lying is to get out of trouble, because most people with a syndrome can't tolerate being wrong. Don't give into a tantrum. The moment you give into a tantrum, you have taught the individual all they need is to be more aggressive, yell louder, wait you out longer, and that you'll eventually give in. Don't do that. You're in it for the long haul, because if you give in over a little thing today, it's going to be bad for you in the long term. So set up responding to temper tantrums very, very calmly without giving in now, and it'll make your life a heck of a lot easier in the future. Don't give into a tantrum. Not giving into a tantrum can look like some of these comedic things. You just literally read a book, look at your phone. Don't give the individual eye contact. I love this one here because literally, if you give the individual eye contact, it starts the clock over again. They think, oh, you're going to give in to me. Just don't give in with eye contact. Don't respond at all. A physician's note that's available from PWCF's website, working with the individual's family or regional center case coordinator to get the physician to sign off on some of these things can be really helpful to document the listing of symptoms and how to manage those symptoms, and using that as documentation in various settings. Again, that's a free download. Empathy as an intervention is extraordinarily important with individuals with the syndrome. It is probably the most powerful and critical intervention with Prader-Willi syndrome that I've ever seen. It is powerful because most people with the syndrome don't have the ability to see things from another person's perspective. So we have to see things from their perspective in order to know how to manage that interaction. So this little cartoon kind of illustrates the fact that if you're getting into a power struggle, it's a 6, no, it's a 9, no, it's a 6, no, it's a 9. If you see, well, how does this individual with Prader-Willi syndrome think that this is a 9? Well, how on earth could they think that? Then you see it from their perspective. Ah, I see, you see the 9. I see, I understand. Now you can create an intervention, managing that. Empathy is not agreeing and it's not disagreeing with the individual, and it's definitely not giving in. It's simply communicating that you understand their perspective, their want, their need. When somebody with the individual feels listened to, they don't need to turn the volume up of their upset or escalate their upset because they know you understand. So again, just get into their mindset. What does it look like from that perspective? You cannot make things worse by emphasizing how much you understand how upsetting this is. Oh, this is so bad. This is terrible. Once you really convey that you understand how terrible it is, they will not get louder. They will reduce in their escalating behavior. And when that happens, now you can begin to work it out. Only after you're certain that they completely understand that you understand their concern can you start to work on a compromise. Empathy is a critical, fundamental intervention. And it's probably the only intervention that can stop an escalating behavior just like that. This is terrible. This is awful. This is the worst possible thing that can happen. You can't, hyperbole, as long as it's genuinely experienced coming from you, will not make things worse. It feels very contradictory when somebody's getting mad about my CD isn't in the store and I came just for my CD, that our first impulse is to say, oh, that's too bad. Oh, I'm sorry. No, don't get upset. We'll find it. That's not going to be helpful. If you respond right away with, this is terrible. We came just to get this CD, right? If after you say, oh, I'm sorry, honey, if that doesn't work, go immediately to that, this is terrible. Go immediately to that empathy. Don't try to talk them out of the upset. It will just create more upset. And don't use your logic and reasoning to help them through their upset. You telling them that, well, honey, we can't go to the back of the warehouse. We can't do that and look for your CD, because that's just, you're telling them they're wrong in that idea. And that's just not going to work. What a brilliant idea to think we could look in the back for that CD. Should we ask somebody, or who should we ask, do you think, if we can look for that CD in the back or use that empathy? Don't engage in a power struggle because you're constrained by logic and reasoning. The individual with the syndrome isn't. And don't argue with a person. Again, you're constrained by logic and reasoning and the individual isn't. Use empathy. And after you use empathy, well, this is terrible. This is just awful that we can't get that CD. Oh my gosh, did you see that there's another CD here that was the one that you also mentioned? So distraction after CD can be helpful. Other words that express empathy are, what a bummer, what a disappointment, that's not fair. When you say these words, they experience it as you understand exactly what they're thinking. Okay, you think this. Repeating their words is often empathy at the basic core level. Painting the picture is our next intervention, very powerful. Knowing what to expect reduces anxiety. And again, anything that reduces anxiety reduces the potential for unwanted behavior. So paint the picture before you're entering any situation, whether it's a new situation or one you've entered 100 times before. Hey, we're going to go to Target. We're going to pick up paper towels and toilet paper. We're not going to be looking for books and CDs today, right? So they know exactly what to expect. Paint the picture for restaurant outings, home visits, changes in the schedule, anything. Make sure, there's no detail that's too small when you're painting that picture. We're going to try a new restaurant. Go online, look at the menu, have them pick their top 2 choices of what they want to have within your boundary limits. And then you're all good to go when you get there. They know exactly what they're going to have. And there's lots of strategies for, think of every single detail. When you walk into a restaurant, they put bread on the middle of the table usually, right? Is the individual able to have bread? If they're able to have bread, how many pieces of bread? If they're going to have bread, are they able to have butter, right? All of these things you're going to be talking about long before and deciding upon, agreeing upon long before you set foot in that restaurant, because once it's all agreed upon, you're not going to have behavior problems in that restaurant. Anticipate that what you do this time is what will be expected to happen next time. So if what happens this time, like you forgot to manage bread, and the individual just reached in to get that bread right away and ate it, then you need to fix that past goof. Because if you don't fix it, the expectation is it will happen again this time. Fixing a past goof creates a new picture of what will be expected to happen this time. So the kind of guidelines for fixing that past goof. Hey, remember last time when you bring up the issue? Remember last time when we went into the restaurant and they put that bread on the table and you had bread? That was pretty delicious bread, wasn't it? Yes, it was. Incorporate empathy. Yes, that was really delicious. Remind the individual how great that was. Now you're going to preface that goof with what's the benefit to that person. You know what though, and bread was pretty high calories, and that means we weren't able to have some other foods that we wanted. And so this time we always want to do what's best for you because we really care about you a lot. So this time we're going to tell the waiter, no bread, please, because that will be much better for you. So we fix that past goof. So a sample of I'm not going to read this example. In your handout is this example about this wonderful chocolate covered banana and how you create a fix that past goof. Okay, I just kind of gave you a sample of a past goof. This is an even more detailed example of how to fix a past goof. Preferred choices are number 5 on our list of top 10 behaviors. Preferred choices mean you're creating a win-win scenario. Because Prader-Willi syndrome causes oppositionalism, right? The brain's automatic reaction is typically to respond with no. And this looks like oppositional defiant argumentative behavior, right? Do you want to put your shoes on? No. Do you want to put your jacket on? No. Do you want a bowl of ice cream? No. I mean, yes. It's an automatic reflexive response, often for the individual with the syndrome. So we avoid yes, no questions. We avoid them. We offer preferred win-win choices. It gets right around that oppositionalism. We make everything about the individual's choice because number 1, it improves their problem solving and decision-making capabilities, and it gives them the experience of having control, and it doesn't give them too much control. Do you want cereal or eggs for breakfast today, right? They get to choose what they want within the preferred choices that you have given them. Yeah. Everything is a choice. Even though individuals don't really know generally time concepts, you can still use time concepts by giving them choices. Do you want to do this in 5 minutes or 7 minutes? Right? Do you want to carry your jacket or wear it? Or do you want me to carry it? 2 choices generally is what we give. Right? Everything can be a choice. The joke in our house was, my son's name is Cameron. Cameron, do you want, we're all out of total cereal. So do you want Cheerios or Cheerios? And my son will say, I think I'll have Cheerios, right? It's the perceived choice about what we're having that is the most impactful within someone with the syndrome. Open-ended questions. What kind of cereal do you want? Is an open-ended question, and that generally creates a lot of anxiety, and it gives the potential that they can have whatever they say they want. And when you say, oh, that's not an option, well, now you just set them up for failure, and that'll be a behavior issue. We'll see maybe later create anxiety. So just say, I don't know. As soon as I know, I'll let you know. Avoid words that say, don't use the word hurry, hurry. Use music, fun games to motivate. Do you think you can put your shoes on within 5 minutes? Strategies like that can hurry, or before the commercial's over. Do you think you can get your shoes on? Allow lots of time for the individual's brain to process through oppositionalism, and do build in extra time wherever you go, especially if you have to be somewhere where there's a deadline, like a doctor's appointment. Preferred choices are really good for managing obsessive compulsive tendencies, giving them the choice between 3 or 5, 5 or 7, always those preferred choices, coupled with empathy. If the individual has a history of stealing items they want from the community, then you may wish to introduce the information about the syndrome to either a store clerk or even your local police department or even neighbors. Medication can help some people who have very severe obsessive compulsive tendencies. However, it is not helpful all the time and for everybody. And medication is what we use last on the list because it is so hard to manage. Disguising those no's. Anything that looks, sounds, or smells like a frustrator could lead to a behavior problem. So we disguise no's. I want to go outside, the individual says. I want to go outside. Your response is, me too. It looks fun out there. As soon as we get our stuff done, let's go outside. I have never said, no, we're not going outside now. What I've said is, me too. As soon as we get our stuff done, we'll go outside. And the individual is going to be much more receptive to that than, no, we'll go outside after our stuff done. Again, language is critically important no matter what the intellectual functioning of the individual with the sympathy. Use empathy, broken record technique. Yes, over and over and over again. Yes, as soon as we get our stuff, we'll go outside. Absolutely. Scheduling the things that the individual wants to do after the things he doesn't want to do. First, we have lunch. First we have our walk around the block, and then we have lunch, because now you're setting the individual up for success. Keep the individual thinking rather than spiraling to a negative feeling. Allow for the possibility of rightness. Individuals with the syndrome have a strong need to be right at all times and at all costs. Disagreements often feel like they have a life or death feel to them, because being wrong to the person with the syndrome actually does feel deathly intolerable. So we want to allow for that possibility of rightness. Well, you might be right. We have our breakfast is at 10. I thought it was at 11, or snack is at 10. I thought it was at 11. But you might be right. Let's go check the schedule. Or where is that schedule? Interesting thought, right? Isn't that interesting? These are all allowing for the possibility of rightness. And again, anticipate that the individual will deny guilt in order to get out of trouble. So we don't want to blame the individual, because that won't be a problem. That will be a problem. Teaching as if you know the individual knows something already is a very helpful strategy that I often use. You know how to hang up your coat, right? You put one shoulder in and then you put the other shoulder in over the hanger, and then we put it in the. So we teach as if the individual already knows how to do it, because a lot of people with the syndrome think they should already know how to do something, and then there's a behavior problem as they try to fake it. And then I use the word goof constantly all the time to show that making a goof, making a mistake is just fine. You know, we all do it. It's just fine. Using egocentrism to your advantage is a very critical intervention. The neurology, the brain wiring of Prader-Willi syndrome causes self-centered thinking, egocentrism. People with the syndrome will love you to death, but they're going to think about themselves first and foremost. So we use that as a strategy to increase their cooperation. So we don't say, if we don't hurry up, housemate Johnny or staff member Johnny is going to be late to his appointment, because the individual with the syndrome may love Johnny to pieces, but do they really care if Johnny's late to his appointment? No, not unless it impacts them. So if we say, if we get Johnny to his appointment on time, then we have time to come home and watch a movie. Now you're going to have increased cooperation. Don't say your yelling is disturbing the other residents or disturbing our neighbors or disturbing the workplace, because do they care? No, they want what they want. That's why they're yelling. Do say, I hear what you want. I hear it. When you speak softly and calm your body, we can talk about how you can get what you want. Teach the other person's perspective, because they don't have the ability to do that. Use egocentrism to your advantage. You know, now that you're 26 years old, I wonder if you're mature enough to start sorting your own laundry. Use this as a strategy to teach new skills, because 9 times out of 10, when you say, do you think you're mature enough? I don't know. Do you think you are? Of course, the individual is going to say, oh, I think I am mature enough. And now you've got them invested in that. Motivate externally, because most individuals with the syndrome lack internal motivation. So they don't have the, I want to keep my room clean because it makes me feel better. They're going to want to keep their room clean because you walked in and said, wow, great job. Your room is really tidy. So verbal praise, high fives, encouragement from you, earning special time with a staff person or something, getting to be a special helper. And of course, those token economies, token reward systems can be very effective with people with the syndrome. Participate with activities alongside the individual. Lead like a mama duck to pull them. That's a strategy we can talk about at a later time. Do remember, executive functioning skills are very deficient in almost everybody with the syndrome. So all of these skill sets will be very difficult for them, and they'll need you to help with those. Common sense, out the door. Judgment, out the door. There's some specialists who say nobody with Prader-Willi syndrome has common sense or judgment. Guide people to conclusions rather than problem solving for them. Use transition prompts to increase flexibility. So transition prompts are, okay, we're going to be we're going to have to leave in 5 minutes. Okay, start finishing up what you're working on. Okay, 3 minutes, we're going to need to stop. Start putting your things away. Okay, 1 minute, are your shoes on? Those are transition prompts. Use those preferred choices to increase flexibility. Ready in 3 minutes or 5 minutes? Because if they pick it, it's more likely to happen. Do you want to put the timer on, or do you want me to put the timer on? I know it's really hard to stop. I know it's really hard to stop. Do you want to stop in 3 minutes or 5 minutes? Don't keep extending the deadline. That's where that lead like a mama duck can come in, and we can look at any one of these strategies in greater detail later. Remember that as the professional provider, you are absolutely critical to the health, safety, and overall quality of life of the persons with Prader-Willi syndrome that are in your care. But do bear in mind that everybody has a bad day now and again, including the person with Prader-Willi syndrome, and that even the most brilliantly managed interventions that you create won't be successful all the time. That's just Prader-Willi syndrome, and actually, that's just life. But when you incorporate the strategies you've just learned here in a very brief amount of time, you're going to create an environment that inspires greater overall cooperation, increased fun amongst your resident and your staff, and increased stress for everybody. Okay, I know that we are 5 minutes over where we should be. I have another meeting that started, but I can cue in on that. If there's anybody who has a question, I mean, I can come back to my meeting in a bit. If anybody has a question that needs to be answered now, you could just take yourself off mute if you'd like and ask a question.
Are fluids caloric and non-caloric, are they also part of the drive?
Yes. Yes. Most people with the syndrome won't drink plain water. but they'll drink lots of juices, orange juices, right? Cokes, all of that high caloric, anything that's high sweet is what they're going to be really craving. So we absolutely limit those. Somebody, especially people who are on medications, can become, they can have acute health issues because they've ingested too much fluid and their electrolytes are now completely out of balance. People have died that way. So yes, we absolutely monitor fluids. Water is probably the best thing to do. Maybe a tiny bit of natural additive like putting cucumber in it to flavor it up a bit, or strawberries or something. Good question.
I know that you mentioned, oh, Stephen, did you have a question?
No, this is fantastic as usual, Lisa. I've been in some of your other seminars, and your information is great. The one issue that we have with the food is that our daughter is on a very, very strict low-calorie diet.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, the mention of pancakes or the mention of Happy Meals is something that we don't even bring up, because
That's right.
it's not even in the realm of possibility.
That's exactly right.
So anyway, but this was great. Thank you so much. And I hope everybody got lots out of it. It's terrific information. And I think if you follow these basic general guidelines, it'll be much more successful in the relationship with the Prader-Willi folks.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen. And you bring up a good point. I mentioned Happy Meals and pancakes. These are highly coveted items. These are not things we would ever really serve on any regular basis to somebody with Prader-Willi syndrome. Pancakes are high carb meals. Anything high carb, anything that's sweet is going to be a highly coveted item, and it's really not in the best interest of anybody with Prader-Willi syndrome to have those high carb, high caloric foods. Diet is and diet management is extremely important with somebody with the syndrome. So working with a nutritionist who's familiar with Prader-Willi syndrome, right? 1,000 calorie a day diet is not out of line for the typical adult with Prader-Willi syndrome. Half, maybe 1,200 calories, half for somebody who wants to maintain weight. If we want to lose weight, we're looking at even less calories than that per day. But there are lots of ways to create wonderful, great, full-looking meals. We can that are lots of food, but really well tolerated in the body of somebody with Prader-Willi syndrome. Any of these topics that we just looked at, especially food management, actually the next Prader-Willi California Foundation behavior management webinar that's going on is all about food and how to make it look like it's a lot of food, and the different types of foods, and the correct diet type that's being recommended by specialists now. It is coming up. So if you're interested in that, let me know. We'll get you a link to how to register.
Lisa, I really appreciate your time, and I know that you've got another meeting and that you've graciously opened yourself up to future supports. So with that said, I thank you so much for your presentation, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much for allowing me. I will share the link with you so that you can share it with your staff as well. Okay, thanks everybody. Good job.
Thanks,
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to end this recording, and then which will end the meeting for everybody, and we'll talk soon, Lisa.